Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Northwest Energy Coalition's webinar on expanding energy efficiency financing. We'll be recording this and we'll make the video available to you later this week. My name is Kat Plimpton. I'm the Outreach Manager with the Northwest Energy Coalition. The coalition leads the Northwest's broadest alliance of energy interests in designing, promoting, and implementing clean, affordable, and equitable energy policy grounded in analytical expertise. The coalition is an alliance of over 100 organizations, including environmental, civic, and human service organizations, utilities, and clean energy and energy efficiency businesses in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, and British Columbia, plus many individual members. If you or your organization have an interest in membership, please contact me at kat@nwenergy.org. On today's webinar, our panelists will each give an opening presentation, then we'll go into questions from our moderator, with time for questions from the audience in between the moderator's questions. We'll also try to leave time toward the end for open Q&A from the audience for our panelists. We'll ask that you use the chat or raise hand feature functions in Zoom to ask questions. Now I'll turn it over to our moderator, Nancy Hirsch.
Hi, thanks, Kat. I'm Nancy Hirsch. I'm the director of the Northwest Energy Coalition. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon for this webinar. We're very excited to have Anthony and Shannon with us today to talk about kind of innovative energy financing tools, energy efficiency financing tools. So, I just reflect on the fact that the Northwest has really led the nation in energy efficiency for over 40 years. And energy efficiency is the second largest resource meeting our energy needs in the region. And yet we need to do more. We need to dig deeper into our buildings and our homes and our industries to maximize energy efficiency, particularly as we're decarbonizing our economy. So we have to look for more creative ways to reach more of our community and explore different kinds of financing tools and program delivery tools that will maximize energy efficiency in both our new buildings and our existing buildings. So today we're going to talk about residential and small commercial energy efficiency in particular. We are planning another webinar in early January that will focus on the larger commercial building sector and some of the innovative pay-for-performance, PACE financing, meets models that are out there for energy efficiency in the large commercial sector. And today we're excited to have Shannon Ellis Brock, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Puget Sound Cooperative Credit Union, not-for-profit member-owned financial cooperative that also provides proactive financing to advance environmental and community sustainability. And Anthony Kinslow is the founder and CEO of Gemini Energy Solutions, a consulting firm that engages, educates, and energizes underrepresented minority communities and the underserved small commercial building market in energy efficiency. And as Kat mentioned, we are going to walk through a series of questions. Well, first we're going to have some opening remarks from Anthony and then from Shannon, and then we'll walk through a series of questions, stopping periodically to get your questions in the mix. So I look forward to your participation in this conversation. And I also wanted to take a minute to thank Kat Plimpton and Patricia Rincon Coalition staff for their work in supporting our webinar and all of our webinars. So thank you, Kat and Patty. So with that, let's turn to Anthony and hear from you this afternoon. Thanks.
Thanks, Nancy, and I appreciate this opportunity to speak with all you here today. Thank you Kat and Patty as well. As mentioned a few times now, Anthony Kinslow, founder and CEO of Gemini Energy Solutions. We're an energy efficiency technology company that is working to democratize the small commercial energy audit space. We are automating the analysis and report for the energy audit so that we can start hiring more people within the communities to conduct small commercial energy audits at an affordable cost for customers. And I think we'll get into that a little bit more during this session about the challenges to that. So I'll be speaking mostly from the small commercials implementer standpoint, but I also have my PhD in energy efficiency analytics from Stanford University, focused on single family homes. So I'll be touching on that as well during the questions from Nancy and all of you. I wear a few other hats. I am an adjunct lecturer at Stanford University. We created a course called Racial Equity in Energy, looking at how focusing on racial equity can accelerate our transition to a clean energy economy. And I'm also a consultant for Clean Energy Works, looking at, in particular, the California Public Utilities Commission's clean energy financing proceeding that is looking at how to better fund energy efficiency programs and transportation and clean energy technology as a whole across all of California. In addition to that, I am also a dad and a husband. My son Marcus is 9 months old now, and luckily he is in the basement, so he won't be too loud during this time. Next slide. So many of you are probably familiar with this, but just some of the financing barriers that exist today, preventing a lot of folks from taking advantage of energy efficiency upgrades, upfront capital, poor credit score, a risk of savings not covering the repayment costs, etc. And all those barriers have one thing in common, and that is that they are debt-based solutions. The idea that you have to lose something in order to gain something, or you have to pay an opportunity cost before you can receive this benefit of energy efficiency upgrades. And what that creates, next slide, is what Professor Tony Reams at University of Michigan calls the donut hole, where those who make less than 200% of the federal poverty line gets government funded coverage, and those who have enough capital can pay for traditional financing coverage, such as those debt-based solutions I talked about. And just to give you all a understanding, 200% of the federal poverty line for a household of 4 is less than $50,000. It's not a lot. So that means that there's a lot of people that fall into this energy efficiency coverage gap, this donut hole. And what does that mean? Next slide. That when we look at who's actually getting the services of energy efficiency upgrades, there's a huge missing opportunity. Right here is that scale and pace matter, right? All of us know that with climate change, we are on a ticking time. I hate to say ticking time bomb, but we are on a ticking clock, right? How fast we implement energy upgrades matters. And looking at this is a graph of the cumulative energy efficiency for weatherization programs. And if you go to the next slide, you see the scale and pace that we're at versus the scale and pace that we need to be starting this year, right? It's a very different slope that we're looking at. And so the question is, how do we get to exponential growth, where from 1990 to today, we have been unable to? And next slide. And what I believe is going to be one of the driving solutions for that is the tariff on bill solution, which takes utilities as a site-specific utility investment with on-bill cost recovery via tariff charge. And I'm sure we'll get more into this, and there may be more questions along that. But the idea being that utility companies are investing in specific meters, specific customers, because there's a benefit to the customer as well as to the utility company, and then they recover the costs as well in a cost-effective manner. Next slide. What the customer sees is, we want to lower your energy bills, and upgrade your house with no out-of-pocket payment or risk to you, which is a very powerful statement and would often probably get a few head turns and surprises and disbelief. But it is something that has been happening in several states and by several utilities. Next slide. What I want you to focus on is the most important things is that 8 states, 18 utilities, over $40 million invested, and you still in 99.8% recovery rate, right? That's a very impressive number, and 0 shutoffs for non-payment. So for all those who are worried about customer protection, 0 shutoffs for all those single-family homes that you see receive this upgrade. Next slide. And so I'll end this and pass it on to Shannon that you think about the tortoise and the hare. Going slow will not win this race. We need to accelerate our pace and our scale, and look forward to discussing more about how we can do that during this time. Thanks.
Thanks, Anthony. Now we're going to turn over to Shannon and get your opening remarks. And then we'll come back to some of the questions in the queue already and some of the prepared questions we have.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy and Kat and Patty for this opportunity. I am Shannon Ellis Brock, as Nancy stated. I'm with Puget Sound Cooperative Credit Union, PSCCU for short. I started there. This is a little background I wanted to provide you all on me and the credit union. So PSCCU has actually been around since 1934. We started out as the credit union for the utility, and through different utility mergers and credit union mergers, we were Puget Sound Energy Credit Union when I started in 2008. And shortly thereafter, we changed our name to PSCCU. Just so people knew that they didn't necessarily have to work at the utility in order to be a member of our credit union. We have grown significantly, and so this is just a little bragging on us. So when I started in 2008, we had about 2,000 members and we're about 20 million in assets. We now have nearly 17,000 members and are over 177 million in assets, which is, for a credit union, a small credit union, I think is pretty impressive. And people always ask, how did you guys do that? And I say, because we did a pilot program with Puget Sound Energy back in 2009, 2010 to fund loans for energy efficiency projects. And at that time, we recognized the importance of making a commitment to future generations and also to ourselves and what our credit union wanted to be, and that was to be Washington's Green Credit Union. Through the years, we've obviously expanded these loan programs through grants and into other states outside of Washington. And I also just want to say that our success is in a large part due to great partnerships and relationships with organizations like the Coalition, and also the great people that we have working at the credit union, other than me. Better than me, I should say. We have a lot of amazing people that do a wonderful job. Next slide, please. So I am mostly focusing on the residential side because that is the bulk of what we do. We do some small commercial, but we have limits in place for our dollar amount, so we don't really venture into the large commercial scale process or loans. So basically, we get things done by trying to have an easy application process for borrowers, fast turnaround times, great relationships with contractors, the homeowners, providing excellent service, ensuring that we keep our rates low and have flexible terms in order to bring the payments down so we can help a broader pool of people. And I always put on-bill financing, not a game changer, bold italic. I'm always the unpopular person in the room when I say that, but we personally have not seen that having on-bill financing is a barrier to people getting access to capital. That's all I'll say about that for now. Next slide, please. Our relationships vary. We try and work with utilities as best we can. There's a lot of regulation around that, but we want to make sure utilities know about our programs and the grant funding that's available and who's been recipients of grant funds so they can refer their customers at least to people that are offering different loan programs for energy efficiency work. We work with the state through the Clean Energy Fund program, different counties and cities and programs that they have. We work with community energy efficiency groups, homeowners, contracts and installers, and a shout out like-minded organizations like the Northwest Energy Coalition. Next slide, please. We have also, and I know I will probably get into this in the question and answer session, but we've been the recipients of grant funding through the state of Washington, through the original ARA fund, through Snohomish County, we have an agreement for grant funds. The credit union has chosen to use grant funding as loan loss reserve funds. We feel that's the best use of the funds, and we can get more into that in the discussion. Using grant funding as loan loss reserve funds allows us to have skin in the game and use the grant funds more broadly and for a longer period of time. And by skin in the game, I mean we use the funds to cover loan losses, but they don't cover 100% of the losses. So if we do take a loss on the loan, the credit union is also responsible for a portion of that loss. Make it matter. This is really important to me because I'm really proud of this. We leverage all the grant funding we receive at a ratio of 20-1. So for every $1 million we get in grant funds, we're funding $20 million in loans. I'm proud of that, and I think it's pretty impressive. That speaks a little bit to giving it back. We also give it back and, again, attempting to keep our loan rates lower than market rate because we want to serve the broadest pool of people that we can. Next slide, please. Oh, again, I feel like I'm very much bragging today, sorry, but I'm really proud of what we've accomplished at the credit union. So we focus in Washington State, although we do lending in Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Arizona, Alaska, but we've done homes for residential and small business from Aberdeen to Zillah, so A to Z. We've funded over 17,000 loans, which equates to over $317 million. That's a combination of energy efficiency, renewal projects, like solar, and that puts money back into the communities that we serve. We also, through some of our grants, track job hours. So that's creating nearly 500,000 in job hours, helping companies grow. And that includes our credit union. So we've expanded from about 10 employees to now we're just hovering around 30 employees. So that's been an exciting journey. And even though we've been doing it for about 10 years, I say it's just the beginning because we are still going and really excited to see what the future holds. And as Anthony says, we need to act and we need to act now. I believe that's my last slide. So I will turn it over to Nancy. Yep, there we go.
All right, great. Thank you, Shannon. It's an exciting success story, and that trajectory seems to match the trajectory that Anthony put up on his slide as far as expansion. We have to look to that expansion. And there was a question in the chat about what targets we're trying to meet and do more with energy efficiency. I think the rationale for doing more on energy efficiency, where do we need to be? We need to be meeting more of our energy needs with energy efficiency so that we can support electrification of buildings and transportation. The more efficient we are, the easier that will be. So more work to do in that regard. I want to turn the conversation kind of back to the concept that Anthony put on the table, which is on bill, or not on bill, but tariff financing, which is on bill, and have you explain that a little further. And when you, there is a program called Pay As You Save, which is a form of tariff on bill. And so Anthony, I'd like you to explain how that works. And then I want to dig into the question of how you make sure that the savings covers the financing costs. So that's a big question. And then we've also had a question in the chat about, is there a difference between tariff on bill and on bill? So if you could explain those two. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. So I guess I should first say pay-as-you-save is a copyrighted term. It is an actual process that is copyrighted. I just want to be clear about that. The tariff on bill, the way, and pay-as-you-save also, they fall both into my next description, focuses on first doing an energy audit to determine what is the cost-effective measures you can implement, right? So if you are thinking of replacing an HVAC unit, your water heater, lighting, it calculates the energy savings, estimated energy savings, and then looks at the cost for replacing those and says, is it cost effective within the time that those equipments, the life cycle of those equipments. Now, to your point, Nancy, about making sure that the savings actually occur, usually what happens is that you buffer that. So you say, instead of 100% of the estimate savings, 80% estimate savings, and maybe even 80% of the life cycle. So really what you're looking at, is it cost effective for 60% of the expected savings? And that gives you a buffer that ensures for that the customer, whether it be residential or commercial, actually is not only showing their utility bill lower, but that they don't have to worry about any of those natural variances and uncertainties that occur when we're doing energy audits. Because especially in residential homes, variance based on individuals' behavior can change the energy consumption pretty dramatically. The utility the utility creates a set amount based on what they expect this estimated savings to be. So say they have a $200 tariff on your bill, and you're going to but you'll be saving $250. So you'll see your bill go down $50. The utility will take that $200, and that maintains on your monthly bill until it's paid off. And then at that point, the customer then owns the equipment. So I think that's a general description of it. There's also auxiliary benefits for utilities that do this. The savings from not having to buy more energy, right? Whether it be capital costs for building new plants or solar power, all that is more expensive than energy efficiency from a cost-effective standpoint.
And I want to follow up there with the question about, is it when a customer is challenged with paying their bill, is there any issues around who gets paid first, whether it's the tariff for energy efficiency or the utility bill, and how is that worked out in different jurisdictions?
Well, the tariff is part of the utility bill, so it's just one line item. I think in a lot of states you have tariffs for any number of things on your utility bill. So when you see an amount on your utility bill, you would have to dig deep to see that line item for the tariff. There is no difference. I didn't mention that the difference between on bill and tariff on bill usually is that it's a loan. On bill financing is typically a loan. In California, the on bill financing for a commercial building is in fact in your books.
And Shannon, is your experience that is a separate part of the bill? And how does that work as far as payment is concerned for the person?
Good question, thank you. So yeah, what Anthony said is correct. So with the on-bill financing as opposed to tariff, the on-bill financing, so we would fund the loan, we would let the utility know that we funded a loan and the person's payment is $100 a month. So the utility then adds that $100 a month payment to their utility bill. It's my understanding it does show up as a separate line item. But where the confusion happens, I think, so it's a separate line item. The utility always gets paid first. So if they fall behind on their loan payment or their utility bill, then obviously if they fall behind on the utility bill, then they're not making their loan payment. Or if they're only paying their utility bill and not the loan payment portion, then as the lender, we would unenroll them from the on-bill financing and then try and work with them, obviously, and bill directly. It can get confusing because I think we're all used to, if we have a loan and we want to pay extra, we pay extra. We just send a check for extra. With on-bill financing, if I want to pay extra on my loan, so I get a utility bill that's $200, my loan payment's $100, so I have a $300 utility bill. I have extra money this month. I want to pay an extra $200 on my loan, so I send the utility to $500. And the utility doesn't send us the extra money. They would apply that as a credit to your future utility bill. So now the customer is confused because they thought they paid extra on the loan. The utility, that's how it works on their end. And now nobody's happy because the customer is upset. They're upset with the credit union. They're upset with the utility. So there's things like that that kind of need to be worked out. I think if that's going to be the next big thing. Again, we just haven't seen that as a hurdle to people getting or obtaining. I mean, we just haven't seen it as an incentive. The bottom line is it's extra work for the utilities. It's extra work for the people, the lenders. The utilities typically, from what I've seen, have some sort of fee involved that they pass along to the financial institution or the customer. The financial institution typically doesn't want to pay a fee if it's passed along to them. So then that gets passed along to the customer. It's not a huge fee. There's also, delays in how everything gets processed. And when you look at utilities that do payments, not monthly payments, but payments on a every other month basis, now your loan payment instead of being $100 is $200, and that's off-putting to some people.
And there was a question in the chat, Shannon, whether your loans require a lien on the property.
Sure, that's a really good question. So how it works is it's not a traditional home equity loan. So whether you have equity in your home is irrelevant. We started doing this when the housing market was crashing and then crashed. So a lot of people didn't have equity in their home. But when we use the equipment as security. So if you're getting a new heat pump and new windows, we put a lien on the heat pump and windows, but because the heat pump and windows are in your house, it will show as a lien on a title search. So if someone were to sell their home, our loan would have to be paid off. If they were doing a refinance or taking out a second mortgage, we typically do what's called a subordination, meaning that our lien is just in the last lien position.
And I just want to tag on to what Shannon said in terms of really separating tariff on bill and on bill financing, right? Is that with tariff on bill, one of the consumer protections is that you can't just pay that off. It stays with the property, so that if you're trying to sell your home, the buyer can't leverage that as a way to kind of, hey, you pay this off or we won't buy it, right? There's no way to do that as a consumer protection component to it. And then another aspect of tariff on bill is that you're able to layer. So if you have grant funding, if you have other monies that can go to make to paying for the event, the utility will invest that money that is up to what is cost effective. So if $5,000 for a $6,000 heat pump is what's cost effective, they'll pay $5,000, and then it's up to the tenant or the owner or the resident to pay that extra $1,000. But in some cases, there may be grant funds that weatherization programs, et cetera, that can add that $1,000. So it's also still no money off for the individual.
And then I think with the on-bill financing piece, again, just to tag on to what Anthony said a little bit, is the assumption is, or not necessarily the on-bill, but our methodology is the assumption is that if you spend this money to make your home more efficient, it adds value to your home. So when you sell your home, you'll be able to sell your home for more money as a result, and then be able to pay the loan off. So the new buyer is, yes, paying more money for the home because they're getting that value, but then they're not having the loan burden as well.
Okay, thank you. We have a question in the chat. When someone lives in subsidized housing, their rent and utilities are capped at 30% of income. How can energy savings be passed on when rent and utilities are coupled this way? Thoughts on that? Thank you for the question.
So my understanding is that while it is capped for what they have to pay, the utility still has to generate the energy demand, right? So by making that home more efficient, then they're getting a higher, then they're still getting the benefits of that. I do not have the answer to that, but just the component of there's still a benefit for the utility to make that home more energy efficient, especially if in subsidized housings, typically that is starting to change, but typically subsidized housings are very energy inefficient.
And are both mechanisms, both the loans on bill and the loans that you provide, Shannon, and tariff on bill, as readily adopted by small commercial as for residential?
Yeah. So we have had an agreement in place with Seattle City Light for probably 5 years to offer on-bill financing. We have not done a loan for anybody on-bill financing. When we've had people inquire about it and we've gone over the process, they've decided that they would just rather do the monthly payment. I honestly thought with solar would be a game changer because, you know, solar, there's a pretty good offset there, and it wasn't. So I don't, other than having an agreement in place, we don't have the experience doing it because, again, our people that are coming to us for the financing just haven't seen, I guess for their personal situation, it hasn't been a benefit to them to do it. So.
Anthony, any thoughts on the small commercial as a percentage of folks engaging in tariff on bill?
So there's not a lot of data behind tariff on bill being used in commercial. I think when in conversations with folks about that, the concern often is about businesses aren't going to be in there as long as owners building them, residential homeowners, excuse me, right? So there's this fear that, well, if the business goes under or they leave, then they're just stuck with that tariff on the with the loss of the investment. I like to push back against that because we've seen from research and data that shows that folks who receive energy upgrades and tend to stay longer into wherever they are. Businesses that receive upgrades tend to stay longer, and places that are energy efficient and receive energy efficiency upgrades are less likely to be empty. So commercial properties. I think there's a great opportunity for tariff on bill and commercial. I'll say that. But right now it's been primarily focused on residential.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I want to explore a little bit with Shannon and you, Anthony, the issue of grant-supported loans. So how is that, if you could dig into that a little more, Shannon, and explain exactly how grant funding has helped you expand your pool.
Yes, I get really excited to talk about that. So, yeah, well, so we did energy efficiency lending before grant money was even a thing. Again, through a pilot program with PSE, seemed like a good idea. Let's do it. And then when there became grant money available, and we applied for some grant funding, what it's done is it's just, you saw the numbers at the beginning of my slide, so it's allowed us to increase who we're able to help exponentially. When we have that money, so as a financial institution, we're obviously regulated. We get regulated by, at the federal level, through the NCUA, we're regulated at the state level by the Department of Financial Institutions. And one of the things they look at is your concentration of loans. So how many loans do you have in one area, and is that a risk? So our credit union obviously has a lot of loans, energy efficiency loans, that we think are, very secure and perform very well, and they do. From a regulatory standpoint, though, if we didn't have grant funding, it might be looked at differently, or we might not be able to do as many loans as we do. So it's helpful in that aspect from the regulatory standpoint. When we look at it as to who we can help, knowing part of every grant fund that we've received, every pool of grant money, we've had to respond to an RFP. And part of that has been, what are we going to do with the money? How many people do we think we can help? What rates and terms are we able to offer because we have this grant funding? So because we have grant funding to back our loans, we're able to offer longer terms, lower interest rates, fixed rates of interest. We're able to not use the home as collateral, is a good example, and do these loans during a housing crisis. We're able to look beyond the typical underwriting that financial institutions look at. So we look at beyond the credit score, beyond the debt to income ratio. We're able to, do underwriting at a bigger, I always feel, when I talk about this, I always feel weird. Like, I don't want anybody to think we're like, oh, we just don't underwrite loans, we'll give credit to everybody. Because we also need to be good stewards of the funds. Part of having this grant money is the expectation that we're going to be able to continue and loan the funds. Just the funds will recycle, and we'll be able to continue to loan and renew, relend them and help the biggest group of people possible. But, we've loaned money to people with credit challenges and people with higher debt to income ratios than we would be able to do if we didn't have the grant fund. So I think for us, it's just really helped us to reach a much broader pool of people than we would have been able to reach, help a broader pool of people, and help people that just didn't, frankly, have access to credit based on whether it was the only option for them was a home equity loan, they didn't have equity in their home, or they've had past credit challenges, or they just started a job last week, or maybe their debt to income ratio is a little bit higher. So, again, having that money has really allowed us to do a lot more than we would have ever been able to do without it. And again, because it also, the energy efficiency side and the doing good and doing the right thing, also is why we don't say give us $1 million and we'll do $1 million in loans. We say give us $1 million and we'll do $20 million in loans. That's why we don't use the loan loss reserves to pay off 100% of a loan loss. It covers a portion of a loan loss, and the credit union covers the other portion, so we can keep those funds going for as long as possible. Sorry, I know I went on a tangent there.
No, that's a good, it was a good question. And there was a question in the chat about, there's a good comment. So what if, say, we just saw this morning that the Jeff Bezos Earth Fund has allocated almost $800 million in funding to different nonprofits across the country. Is there private sector funding like that could support the kind of work you're both doing? And how do we entice those kinds of big donors, so to speak, to support your work? both of your work, both in the small commercial and the residential sector? What are the opportunities there?
Shannon, do you want to go first, or should I?
Please go ahead.
Okay. So I first want to give people an understanding that when we think about private and public funding to help increase the pool of individuals who can close I'll use the analogy again, the donut hole, right? If we use private and public funding to start to close that donut hole, as long as we're talking about debt-based solutions such as a loan, we're gonna not be able to fully close that hole. I want to first say that. Second thing to that is the order of magnitude of money that is needed is in the billions, not the millions. So I also, when we talk about pace and scale, we need billions of dollars to reach what we're trying to reach. I do think that private and public funding is absolutely critical, though, to reach that. No solution out there, tariff on, whether it be tariff on bill or on bill financing, will allow us to reach our goals without leveraging private and public funding, and doing so in a way that supports what is already happening, supports the great work Shannon's team is doing, for instance, is something that I think is the best way to leverage that instead. And I'll pause there.
And then, yeah, I think, you know, adding on to some of what Anthony said, there is that donut hole, right? That is definitely there. But yes, so much could happen, right? Like, okay, so let's take like low income families and those challenges and people that have, and again, I think we often equate low income families as having poor credit. That is not always the case, but in reality, the two often go hand in hand. So if there's a way we could have a pool of funds and say, okay, I'm going to go with Anthony's term, here's $1 billion. So if we could use $1 billion and loan to anybody and not worry about underwriting period, and know that we could use, say, 99% or even 100% to pay off loan losses. We're helping families with credit challenges rebuild credit, which is important to helping them grow and get into a better place, right? We as a financial institution wouldn't have to worry about, you know, the loan defaults on the loans. But I think it's a combination of things. It's a combination of using grant funds to be able to offer low-income families reduced interest rates, having grants available to offset part of the project cost, so the dollar amount they're financing is lower. There's just so many things, a lot of work left to be done in so many ways that could be made to happen. But I think there's not one solution that's going to be right for everybody, and I think it needs to be, again, a combination of things. But I think if we didn't have to worry about underwriting, and we could say, no matter what your challenge is, we'll be able to, if we're just talking about a loan, if we didn't have to worry about credit challenges, debt to income ratio, any of that, if we could just say, here's a loan, you pay $25 a month until it's paid off, and we could perhaps have grants to reduce the cost of the equipment and manage that. We're giving somebody the opportunity to improve their credit, which is important in life. I mean, we have to do credit for everything, right? At a low cost, and not have to worry about, okay, you know, we can only absorb so many stuff, and having that money to cover that. I think that, you know, that's part of the solution, not the only solution, but it's definitely part of the solution.
And how do utility rebates fit into the calculations for both loans and the tariff on bill and the energy assessments that are done to kind of set up what opportunities are available? Is that that's another source of funding?
So, well, the energy, we had our pre-meeting to talk about this. We talked a little bit about the energy assessment, the energy audit, whatever we're calling it these days. I always thought that was a really good tool, because I know when I had one done on my house, it was extremely helpful because I had a list of things I could do at no cost. The next set of recommendations were at very low cost, and then the list of things that I probably needed a loan for. But it was a good tool for me to refer back to know, like, okay, I did the low cost things and the no cost things. Maybe I'm in a place now where I can take out a loan or do these other things. What were those next measures? So it was a good playbook, and I do think that's important. And now I forgot what the other part of the question is. So now I'll let Anthony, I feel like I'm in the debate stage. I only caught part of that. I'll let Anthony speak to the other part that I forgot.
Well, in terms of the rebates in California, it's pretty convoluted. You can get the 0% on-bill financing, and it sometimes seems like it's or the rebates, right? It doesn't allow you to combine very easily. I think that in the future, and this is one of the things that's being discussed in California, is how do you make sure that all the incentives and rebates that exist are able to stack very easily, so that any customer that's coming doesn't have to have a PhD in this or a master's in this to understand what their options are. It also allows the implementers a lot better, easier time explaining it to the customers, and also in the calculations of it to really understand what is feasible and what is the cost effectiveness of the different measures they're arguing for.
Okay.
Well, then I think too, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Shannon.
I just wanted to add quickly, now that Anthony refreshed my memory on the second part of the question. From a lender's perspective on the rebates, it would be really nice if we could just work out a way where the rebates maybe went directly to the contractor, and the contractor immediately took that off the job. Because if my project's $10,000 and I'm going to get a $2,000 rebate, that's great. But until I get the $2,000 rebate, I still need to finance $10,000, and my payment's going to be based on $10,000 while I'm waiting to get the rebate for $2,000. And it's a hassle to redo the loan to lower the payment down after that fact. And maybe I got the $2,000 and I decided I didn't want to pay it on my loan, even though I know that I should have. So if we could work out a way where the rebate just goes directly to the person doing the work, it's immediately taken off the price of the project, then the homeowner is financing that lesser amount, having a lower payment in the first place. And that seems like the best way to handle things.
I second that. Anything to make it simpler for the customer.
Interesting. Okay. We had a little bit of dialogue in the chat about CPACER, the Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy. And in Washington State, we have that, and it is for commercial projects. We don't have PACE financing for residential in here. And in January, we are going to have a commercial webinar where we're looking at financing tools that are available for the larger commercial sector. So we'll pick up that kind of program and how it works at that time in January. I wanted to talk a little bit about financing as it relates at the time when the property is sold, right? So that's a significant moment in time when there's a lot of money changing hands and there's already a mortgage conversation happening. So how do we encourage, how can we build more interest in energy efficiency at the residential level for upgrades to happen when that property is changing hands? Thoughts on that?
When you first, Nancy, I hadn't heard about this idea before you mentioned it, and I like it as an added part of the solutions, right? As when you think of a bucket, we need buckets of solutions to really get to our goal. I like it as throw it in there with other solutions because it also means that, well, there's two reasons. One, behavior science research shows that people are more likely to do something like an energy efficiency upgrade if they're already going through a shift in their life, right? Buying a new home is a major change, which is a point of emphasis for behavior science to get people to be more energy efficient. You can even add, hey, you get this energy upgrade and we'll teach you about what these are, so to ensure that the new occupants are going to be utilizing this at the most efficient way. The second component of this is that it only targets, is the flip side of this, it only targets folks who are buying new homes, which also limits it. And that's why I say add it to the bucket, because it sounds nice and is, from a behavioral science, a smart thing to do, but it also doesn't allow for the scale and pace by itself. I will add that in Europe, they do have, before you sell your home, you have to do an energy audit, right? So there are other places that are already taking advantage of this moment in time that is a drastic change, where people are willing to say, why not? Let's just do this also.
Yeah, and I agree with what Anthony said. You need to get, part of the thing is, right, you need to get people that are doing the valuations on the property to recognize energy efficiency as added value. So I'm like, when we refinanced our house and the appraiser came to our house years ago, like right after we got our heat pump, I was so excited. And they're talking about, oh, you have a closet. That's such a great feature. I'm like, who cares? I have a heat pump. Look, a heat pump. Woohoo. And like, she's like, yeah. I'm like, no, it's a heat pump. I want credit for that. I don't care about my laundry closet. So, and that was, you know, over 10 years ago. And like, not much has changed. Appraisers need to recognize the value that the energy efficiency brings to the home. Or mortgage companies aren't going to want to lend on that one. I also think when, you know, Anthony talked about having the energy efficiency assessment done, why isn't that part of, like, when you go online and you look at properties, right, you'll see the walkable score or the score for the school or the score for this. I lived in a very small apartment in Bremerton, Washington that had gas heat. And when I moved from my 750 square foot small apartment to a 3-story townhome that was twice the size, that was no longer gas heat, and I got my first electrical bill, I almost cried. And I'm not kidding when I say that. I really did almost cry. It was painful. And I didn't know what I was going to do. So I think that's a shock for people, right? If you're in an apartment and you buy a house, you're so happy that you're buying this house, and then you get the utility bill and you're like, oh. So to me, I think that would be a good, if that was part of the home buying process, and don't get me wrong, I really care about the walkable scores in the neighborhood too. I don't have kids, so I don't care much about the schools, although I understand why that's important to people. But that should be part of the process, right? And even if it's not included when someone's buying the home, maybe the options are. So maybe that's part of the sales process to say, okay, you can see the, whatever we want to call it, the energy efficiency score isn't very good, but as you're purchasing this home, here's some other options that you can do to offset the cost to make these upgrades, even if it's not included in the mortgage, although that would be an ideal situation. But I think we just need to have more, again, it's been a challenge. As you know, I've been working with groups and talking to appraisers for years, and it's just not seen as I don't know, it doesn't get taken necessarily into consideration. I know solar does more. Solar's sexy, it's on the roof, people can see it. Other measures, the insulation is behind your walls, you can't really see that. Yeah, those things need to be taken into consideration because they're adding value. And if they need to be done, again, we need to say, okay, here's the value of the house now, but if you make these energy efficiency improvements, it's going to add this to the value. So let's count this higher value as a true value.
Yeah. And can we encourage more lenders, such as yourself, to engage with realtors more proactively in those conversations? Because that seems there's somewhat of a roadblock there on the realtor end, as it just complicates the transaction, perhaps. And anything that complicates a transaction is something that they are nervous about. But more support on the financing side and encouraging that could be an opportunity.
I agree. As with having an energy efficiency score as part of the home sale process.
Yes.
That would make everybody have to act in some form or another.
And Nancy, I will say that real estate folks already do, like the high end, the quality real estate folks do a look at the house in other ways, right? So energy could just be an added aspect of that. And one way to pitch it could be, hey, only the quality real estate agents do this, right? The real good, as a way to tag it to a competitive edge in the market.
And there's been some questions in the chat about benchmarking, which we've talked a little bit about. The disclosure, the city of Portland has a energy requirement. What are other jurisdictions doing something similar to educate residential customers?
I'm not familiar.
Okay.
Shannon.
Okay. That's all right.
Yeah, and I don't believe so. I know that there was a while ago, and by a while ago, probably close to 10 years ago, I think there was a push at a legislative level to have some sort of disclosure, and that didn't go very far. There was a lot of pushback.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Let's move on to we wanted to kind of go back to this conversation we were having a little bit earlier about the landlord-tenant conflict or challenge, I guess, and how we can help tenants lower their utility bills, even though they don't own the property. And what kinds of, how are you seeing the tools that you're working with addressing this challenge of the split incentive between landlords and tenants?
Yeah, on my end, we actually target tenants, which I'm finding is more and more unique in my space, in part because what we found is if we go through the property owner, it's very difficult if you don't get buy-in from the tenants, right? You depend on them to let you into the space. You depend on them to engage with you. You have to do, for an energy audit, you need to do an interview to understand how the operation is being done with that space. We leave sensors in the space for over a week to really understand the energy, the behavior of the building. So we focus on the tenants. And what that means is that when we give them solutions, a report that says, hey, lighting, this is how much you'll save, this is how much we estimate it will cost, this is your payback. Most of those items, the tenant can take care of themselves. If they have, in California, for instance, the 0% interest financing is based on who's paying the electric bill. In Tennessee, their energy efficiency loan program that is state funded, but it's its own entity. They actually would give the money directly to whoever's requesting that loan. And Shannon, I guess you could speak to how y'all would handle that. But the one exception to that is typically HVAC equipment. That is, replacing your HVAC equipment is typically the cost of the landlord. But at the same time, if the landlord hears that they can get, if the landlord hears they have 30-year-old HVAC equipment that could fail at any given time, then they have to pay for that, versus they could get a loan or 0% interest financing or something that will allow them to have that payment over a period of time and have it planned, then we haven't seen much issue with that from landlords.
And for what we're doing, just from the lending standpoint, so on the small commercial, small business financing, that's pretty much, it's been a mix. So a lot of it's tenants coming to us wanting to do the improvements because obviously they're paying the bills and it behooves them and their business. So, you know, we do work with the property owner because there's documentation that they have to sign, et cetera. And then we also see landlords on both the small business side and multifamily side, or people that have rentals that are coming to us for loans because on the commercial side, they feel that they can attract better tenants. They feel they can attract more rents, potentially. If they're paying the utilities, obviously it behooves them to do it. On the residential side, we'll see landlords come to us for many times the same reason. You know, some landlords just want to do it because it's like it feels good to them to be able to offer their property and say, hey, these are all the measures that I put in place to make sure the home is more efficient. Therefore, you're going to pay less in utilities. They may charge more for the rent because of that. Some have said that they plan on keeping rents low. They're doing it because they want to set an example and show what could be done. We do not have, to be frank, and this is part of the reason why I like in participating in panels like this and these discussions, because it makes me think. We do not have a good mechanism in place on the residential side. If somebody comes to us and say, hey, I'm renting my house, I want to make it more efficient. The landlord says, I can take out a loan to do the work. How does that work? We don't have a way right now to make that work, but my takeaway from this is going to be to figure out a way to make that work because it's good for everybody. And there has to be a way to make it work. So that's kind of the challenges that it's less challenging on the commercial side. On the residential side, it poses more of a challenge, but who doesn't like a good challenge, especially in 2020?
Right. Yeah, let's move on to the next question. And it kind of relates to what we've just been talking about. You know, as Anthony said at the beginning, climate change is really accelerating the need for going deeper into buildings. So, you know, traditionally, how a lot of energy efficiency has been done is, you know, you mentioned it, Shannon, the audit. You know, you have an audit, so now you know what you can do and stage over time. Well, in the era of climate change, we need to do more sooner. So how do we bundle these projects so that they're more easily done at once, so that we capture all the energy efficiency we can get rather than dribbling it out over a 10-year period? And that requires a little more collaboration between all the actors involved. And this is the kind of thing that we're seeing on the large commercial scale, where we're getting deeper into buildings. We're going beyond lighting to try and get a whole systemic approach to improving efficiency within a big commercial building. And we need to do the same thing at the residential and small commercial scale. So what opportunities are you seeing there for bringing more voices to the table to talk about almost one-stop action rather than over time efficiency improvements? Anthony, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. I first want to kind of lay out some of the challenges and considerations within this, right? One of the challenges is from an energy efficiency standpoint is calculating these savings, right? It's easy to calculate what your light savings is if all you're doing is lighting retrofit. It's easy to do HVAC. It starts getting more challenging when the more you replace, which also increases the uncertainty in your estimate for your energy savings, which increases the uncertainty for your estimate in your cost savings and your payback period. I think that's important to at least say, right, to acknowledge, even with us understanding that it is critical for us to find out how to do this. There are groups that are working to a one-stop shop model. Energy Efficiency for All has a beautiful graphic about this, which I can share with the Northwest Energy Coalition, and you can send that out. One of the major components of it from an implementer standpoint is definitely the connecting and incentivization of it. Right? I hate to put it like that, but businesses aren't going to make these changes unless there's a benefit for them, because it makes things more complicated for them. And so I think there's this understanding that for most energy efficiency implementers, you're not going to get them to just say, sure, why not? yeah, I'll add complexity to my business model without any benefit added. And so I'm going to pause now and give Shannon the floor, and then I think I'll have more to say afterwards.
Oh, thanks. This is a tough one, right? And yeah, I ditto everything Anthony said, and I don't know, like you have to show the benefit and incentivize, as Anthony said, people doing that. From the financing standpoint, people are always like, well, you could offer a lower rate, or you could do, well, we could, but our rates are already really low. And at some point, like, we can't lose money on loans. If we lose money on loans, then we're not going to be in business, right? I can't pay, we can't pay our staff. We can't have the systems in place we need to fund the loans. So I think just getting rid of the barriers. And I don't know, back in the days when the city of Seattle had the Community Power Works, I know Portland's had similar programs, Oregon's and other cities, where it was kind of a one-stop shop where you got an energy assessment of your home, you saw everything that could be done. They gave you some referrals for a handful of contractors to do the work, so you weren't sorting through all that. Here's 2 or 3 or just one lender, I don't know. Here's some lenders you can work with to do the financing. And at that time, and I may be wrong on this, so if I am and somebody on the call knows this, you feel free to correct me. But I think the incentives were also based on the amount of work that you got done, right? So if you did, maybe your level 1 improvements are this, and if you do these measures, you get a $100 rebate. But level 2 included doing these extra measures, and if you did these measures, then you get a $500 rebate. But if you went all in, then you got, this rebate. And I understand, like, I often, Nancy, when I'm at the conferences, when we used to have those in person and people would talk, sometimes I would leave and I think it's just too late. Like, there's nothing we can do. It's all too late. And we can't think that way. But some people are just slower to the process. So what we see is people will do one measure and then they come back and they see that it worked and they see their utility bill is lower, and now they want to do these other measures. And I don't know how we get people to dive all in. Sometimes people just need to take those baby steps and see it for themselves, as much as we wish people would act quickly. I don't know. I think, as Anthony said, all I can think of is that you need to incentivize people for doing more, for doing the most that they can do, and show them that immediate benefit.
Yeah, if you don't
Go
mind,
ahead, Anthony.
A few extra things. I knew Shannon would spark some things for me, so I appreciate it. One is one example. I have a client in San Francisco, restaurant, and I told him, hey, what would you like? How would you be interested in switching from gas to electric regarding their oven? And at first they're like, yeah, why not? I guess, talk to the chef, etc. But then when they realized that there was going to be no added benefit from the on-bill financing, they decide just to keep what they're used to. Right? So even the structure of the financing is, because the financing is based off of your electric energy savings. And right now, gas is a lot cheaper than electricity. So, but in the future, as we start transitioning away from gas, that's probably not going to be the case. But right now, there's no incentive. While California wants to push electrification, they don't have any incentive. They're not incentivizing that in their financing options. Another aspect to this is, from an implementer standpoint, the more measures you do, the greater the savings is going to be. And on top, if you do it right, the cost is also going to go down too. It's not as if you add the cost, lighting plus HVAC plus equipment. It in fact means if you do all of those, then your HVAC, the size of your HVAC is lower. Instead of a 3-ton, maybe you need a 2-ton, right? That reduces your overall cost. And so understanding that means that quality energy efficiency analysis will actually give you a bigger savings with the less cost overall. And so tying incentives to how much you find money for the client can also start to propel that forward. And then lastly, I'll say you need some consistency in the calculations. You can't have everybody doing their own type of calculations with this, because then that, I'm sure Shannon can agree with that uncertainty of, well, how did you actually calculate this? You're literally changing everything in the home, and you came out with this. Well, how do we know this is accurate? And from a consumer protection standpoint, I'm sure that would become a nightmare as well. So just some things to add.
And I also thought, sorry, just really quickly, I want to add, like we all know we can, in your neighborhood, right? You can pull up a list of like, I want to go to a woman-owned business because that's important to me, or I want to support minority-owned businesses and that's important to me. So there's a list where I can find those things. What if there's a list where I could find businesses that, you know, I don't know what we would call it, whatever, but businesses that have made this choice to invest in their business and the environment and future generations, and they could be a list. So if I'm deciding where I want to eat dinner, and I know these two restaurants are good, but this restaurant, oh, they did these energy efficiency measures and they're doing these things to help climate change. Maybe I want to go to that restaurant instead. Just throwing it out there as an idea. I don't know.
More labeling. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's been some talk in the chat about utility support for pay-as-you-save or on-bill financing, and how do we get them into the conversation? So we didn't have a utility on this panel because we wanted to keep it from the financing and energy services angle. But how do we get utilities interested in this kind of longer or deeper dive into energy efficiency and into these kind of newer financing mechanisms? Anthony, have you had any experience where you've been able to bring the utility into the conversation successfully? And then we'll move to the question that's on the screen.
Yeah, so because Holly had a great question, and so did you, Nate. I personally have not. I will say that a great organization, eUtility, has been very successful in doing that and having those conversations. I also say Liberty Homes has been really good at pushing data and the evidence to support why this is working. I mentioned I'm an adjunct lecturer and we're teaching a course called Racial Equity and Energy. In one of our classes, we talked about tariff on bill. And at the end of the and we had Curtis Wynn, who's CEO and president of Roanoke Electric Cooperative out of North Carolina, speaking about why the pay-as-you-save or the tariff on bill model is working so well for his utility. And so a lot of folks had that question about why aren't, a lot of the students were like, well, why aren't more utilities doing this? And I think one of the biggest things that I hear and that other people have told me is that the lack of measurement and verification has been something that utilities have hung their hat on as to why they don't need to do it. There's a fear component of it, which quite frankly, I don't think is a strong reason when you have other utilities who are doing so well and are praising it and will scream it, will talk to you and tell you how well this works, for you to kind of hang on to that fear and that, and really it's just like, it's a fear of whether you can do it well because other people are doing it well. And so I'll pause there, Shannon.
Oh, great. I'm gonna have to speak to the on-bill financing thing again. Okay.
Right.
So again, I am speaking strictly to on-bill financing. It's obviously a lot different than what Anthony's talking about, which I definitely can see how that would be, that it's different, and I definitely see the benefit of that. I personally am Shannon E at psccu.org. If anybody wants to send me documentation to prove differently, I have not seen any study, any documentation that on-bill financing for a loan is a game changer. It's a payment, whether it's on your utility bill or it's directly to the credit union. So again, two different things, but if you're getting a loan, I have not seen evidence that paying it on your utility bill as opposed to paying it directly to the lender, I have not seen anything that shows me that there's a huge difference in doing that.
And Shannon, to follow up on your loans, there was a question in the chat about whether when you offer a 15 or 20-year loan, do you find
Sure.
people ready to go deeper or into fuel switching? Or, you talked about before, you offer all your rates are already lower. Well, what if you offered 2% financing if you went all in on your retrofit and 3% financing if you don't? Would that make a difference and draw people deeper into their retrofit?
That's a good question, and I don't know. Interest rates are a lot about perception. There's not a huge payment difference in a 2% loan, a 3% loan, a 1% loan. I think everybody assumes like, oh, it's going to be like $200 difference. And it's not. It's usually, $10, $20, depending. I think that is a creative solution, and there could be a way to look at that. But again, at some point, you can only have your rate so low because the money that you're getting to lend out, you're getting from people that are depositing with you, and you have to pay those depositors a rate high enough to entice them to deposit money with you. And then again, you're paying staff and you're paying for the systems in place. So at some point, we try and find that balance to offer the rates as low as we can, keep the doors open, keep our members happy, and still attract the broadest pool of people that we can. So there's ways to, again, when we talk about if somebody had $1 billion, can we use part of that $1 billion to buy down the interest rate so we can offer programs like that? Yeah, I think that could be a game changer. I don't know. I don't have a better answer. And when you talk about the longer term loans, if we could say, okay, well, we'll offer a 30% or a 30-year loan because that'll really bring the payments down. But as I was messaging earlier, then and again, I'm just speaking as a financial institution, then you're having 30-year fixed rate loans. So now you have interest rate risk where if you do a whole bunch of loans for 30 years fixed rates and interest rates suddenly go up, then that can be the end of a business. It can be an end of a financial institution. So then do we want to say, okay, well, we're going to do those loans, they're all going to be variable rate loans. Then that creates uncertainty for the borrower. So how do we balance that? And I don't have the solutions. And there's also the regulatory standpoint again, because the regulators are going to look at, okay, you have 80% of the loans you do are 30-year fixed rate loans. You cannot have such a high concentration of long-term fixed rate loans. So that plays into it as well.
And I think what Shannon's saying over and over, that's not a game changer. This isn't a game changer. Quite frankly, we're not going to have a game changer as long as we start looking at loans as the solution. A debt-based solution where where opportunity cost is automatically removes people, whether it's someone who just doesn't want to know loan, someone who's got maybe their parent had a bad experience with loans or something like that. Someone who just can't afford it, even with that low interest rate, who just can't afford it, or even with the supplementing of that Shannon's group has with the grants, their credit score just isn't to that level. I mean, there's still folks like that. So as long as we keep holding on to loans as the solution, there's not going to be a game changer. And we're going to be sitting here 10 years from now with everything on fire, everything flooded, and still talking about what's going to be the game changer. How do we make loans more enticing? And quite frankly, no matter how pretty you, no matter how much makeup you put on a pig, it's still a pig. It's a Southern saying. I'm sorry, I'm from Nashville originally.
Well, I want to pivot a little bit to the topic of workforce. So we talked a little bit on our prep call about contractors and how we support them in this space. And of course, during the period of COVID, a lot of work has slowed. But assuming we get past this, how do we not just incentivize contractors to accept smaller jobs, but to get wanting to get their customer who reaches out to them to think differently and to dig deeper into the building, and to get knowledge about high efficiency equipment? Are there ways, are you seeing in the work you do ways to help contractors get more educated and to work on a broader energy efficiency portfolio in the work that they do with customers?
I know there was a whole program down connected with the Southeastern Energy Efficiency Alliance during the Obama tenure, where they were trying to they got a huge bucket of money from the federal government, and they were working to do audits and implement energy efficiency upgrades throughout the Southeast. And one of the real challenges that they noticed was the importance of working with the contractor and engaging and educating them. So there is a case study out there with a whole report about how to improve, how to work with that. What we do at Gemini is we try and work and meet with contractors ahead of time, so that when we're working with a client, we can provide them with contractors who we feel are already going to be doing the thoughtful aspects. So they're going to be suggesting high efficiency equipment, not just the whatever equipment that is on the shelf. And you have to enforce that. Contractors, with several contractors I've talked to, they tell me, oh, how about this equipment as a replacement? I'm like, well, no, 17 SEER at least. And I have to push back because just culturally, there needs to be a shift within contractors. And I hesitate to say that you need to do credentials or certifications for this, because as soon as you do that, what ends up happening is minority contractors get left behind. Because when we do create these certifications, we do not reach out to minority contractors the way we reach out to others. It just has not happened, and I don't trust it to happen in the future.
Fair enough. Shannon, thoughts on the workforce and how we engage them more in doing deeper energy efficiency and having the skill set to work on high efficiency equipment?
Sure. So, yeah, that's a good question. So we kind of do that in a sense now, in that the programs where we have grant funding, there are energy efficiency requirements. The equipment has to meet certain standards, like Anthony was talking about. You know, if you're doing a heat pump, it has to be a certain SEER rating. You know, these factors are in place. If you don't want to do any of those equipment, we'll put you, but that's more targeted at the lender or at the borrower, not necessarily the contractor, although the contractor knows. So if people don't want to, if someone does not want to meet these standards, then we still have a loan program that will accommodate them, but the rates and terms are high, or interest rates are higher, and the terms are not as attractive. So we reward the borrower and, in essence, the contractor for meeting certain standards when it comes to energy efficiency by offering them better interest rates and the availability to do longer term financing. The small jobs, you know, that's hard. We do see, like we talked about earlier, we do see some small jobs, but that is hard. And I don't know, you know, that is conversations that need to happen. We are not having those conversations necessarily with the contractors. You know, I guess I liken it to, like, if I go to an event and maybe only talk to one person, whoever was hosting the event's like, oh, I'm sorry, I hope you didn't think that was a waste of your time. I'm like, it's not. If I could educate one person about what the credit union is doing about energy efficiency, then it was worth my time. And hopefully something comes of it. If not, that's fine. So I hope contractors feel the same way, where they're thinking that, hey, if we do this small job now, maybe that person will come back to us for the larger job. And how can we talk to them now so they know about these other things that are available if we can't convince them to do it now?
There's also, and on the commercial side, it's quite difficult to find contractors who, the first question they ask me is, well, how big is the job, right? And if it's under a certain threshold for them, then they don't even want to bid on it. It's not even worth their time to bid on the contract, on the job. One of the things that I've been talking with other implementers about is, for small commercial, it's actually looking like residential contractors as the solution to that, because they're used to smaller jobs already. And something that I'm starting to explore is the use of residential for small commercial, and of course, looking at the licensing business, contract licensing components of that in different states. But it is a challenge when you're talking about small commercial. You're talking about 2,000 square feet. That's hard to convince a lighting person to come and do 50 bulbs.
Right. Right. That is a challenge for sure. And more interaction, maybe more interaction between the residential and the small commercial contracting community is necessary, and more dialogue from lenders and utilities to share those resources across those two sectors. Makes sense. We had, I think we're pretty well wrapped up on questions from the chat. I guess I'd like to leave a minute for Shannon and Anthony to ask or make any kind of closing statement, anything that you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to say through our Q&A, any questions in the chat that you wanted to address or follow-up information you wanted to provide. And I'll just remind everybody that we have recorded this. We'll have it available if folks want to take another listen. We'll also save the chat, because there were a lot of resources posted on the chat that if folks didn't get a chance to write them down or copy them, you can get them through our office. Not sure how we'll post them, but we'll figure out a way to clean up some of the resources that are identified in the chat, make those available. Any closing comments, Shannon, Anthony, before we wrap it up? I just want to also thank you very much for your time and for sharing your information, your wisdom with our community, and give you a minute to say any closing remarks you have.
Well, I would like to say that putting lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig, but it's a prettier pig. And every time I talk about my loan program now, I'm going to think of Anthony's analogy. Yeah. So I would like to close by thanking the Northwest Energy Coalition, all of you guys, everybody that asked such great questions, and say, if anybody out there knows of any community organizations, rich people that want to talk about what they can do with their money and how we can work together to open up financing to more people, especially low-income communities, we'd love to talk about that and other things too. But, definitely, for sure.
Anthony, thank you.
Well, thank you, Shannon, for being up here with me. It was really great to hear the work that y'all are doing up there. And I'm rooting for y'all to keep expanding, because it is necessary and vital. Northwest Energy Coalition, thank you so much for having me. And to everyone asking questions, continue to ask questions, continue to dive into this. Is important, and there are solutions out there that are working. I encourage you to, this wasn't a chat, but Liberty Homes does some great work in providing updates on what's been going on across the country, as well as informing you about data and just overall what's happening with Pay As You Save and Tariff on Bill, and that solution to better understand whether or how, because it will work, but how it will work where you are. So I'll leave with that and say, yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I think that's a wrap. Thank you all the participants for the great questions, and appreciate everybody's time. And again, thank you to Kat and Patty for facilitating this, and Shannon and Anthony. I look forward to the next time.